Okay. So we're going to look at sections 1.3 through 1.6 today. We're going to look at sections 1.3 through. So we're going to basically look at a bunch of sampling and then how experimentals are or experiments are set up, and some of the biases that can come up in our sampling methods. We briefly talked about simple random sampling on Tuesday, but I really didn't get into it as much as I really needed to, so we're going to go through that again a little bit more today. So remember, the whole concept of when we're looking at trying to collect data is we need to have some way to have it randomized to be able to get good data. We can collect a bunch of data, but if it's not good data, then it's useless to us. So the selection, when you're looking at a random sample, the first thing you want to do is you need to list what's in the population. Okay, so we need to figure out what is our population that we're going to look at and have some way to list everybody in it. Okay, so typically you are not going to be looking at like the entire United States at a time. We have other ways to be able to deal with that situation in a minute. But like, say I want to just survey this class because there's actually more than 30 of you here, we could do that. So this would be my population. I could give you each a specific number, or I could use your ID numbers. Then I would set up a computer program, or you could do it on your calculator, you could do it on your phone, and say, pick me 10 numbers out of this list. Randomly select me 10 numbers. And those would be the 10 that I would choose to actually interview or collect the data on. And that would be a sample that I would use. So the key is that there is no connection between me assigning your numbers and how I'm picking the random list. Okay? That's the big piece that you need to look at when you're looking at a simple random sampling, is that you're not the one randomly picking things. Because like I can walk up and down the line and tap like random people on the shoulders. However, we all have inherent biases on how we would do that. Okay? Even going up and picking every third person can actually skew data in certain ways. So by having a computer or something outside randomly assign those numbers, it takes care of that problem. So how do we do a larger system? So if you have a smaller group, it's really easy to assign numbers and randomly select it. Or if you're doing larger ones, it's easy to have like computers do those large number calculations. But how do we somehow like actually organize this a little bit better? So one of the things we talked about on Tuesday was how your generation is really underrepresented when they do online like phone polls and stuff like that, because you don't answer the phone. So I want to make sure that I get your demographic when I'm doing the polling data. That's where stratified sampling comes in. So I look at the demographics of my population, and I can sort it any way I want. So the example here is they're looking at it in terms of registered voting. So they were looking at Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. Now, here is a slight thing with the way they worded it here. They choose 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, and 50 Independents. That is making the assumption that the demographics of the entire population is equal in those three things. Okay? So when you're stratifying things, you want to make sure that your sample has an equal distribution to what the population does. So, for example, right now, we have, let's assume the population is 100 people. Because I actually happen to know the numbers. The nationwide Democratic Party is about 31%. The nationwide Democratic or Republican Party is actually also about 31%. Independents make up 38% of the population. So if I was going to stratify and pick a sample of 100 people, I would want to make sure I picked 31 Democrats, 31 Republicans, and 38 independents. I don't want to pick them all equal unless they're all equal in the population. Does that make sense? Okay? So like in this room, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 guys? I think I caught them all. So there's 6 males in this classroom. So if I'm going to pick a sample of this classroom, I'm going to choose a lot more females than males. Okay? I wouldn't pick 6 males and 6 females because that's going to overrepresent the males in the classroom. That make sense? Yes? Okay. That's what stratified sampling is. It allows us to, you see this a lot of times in politics. You see this a lot of times when we'll use economic factors, okay? Making sure that we hit a certain number of low-income families and upper-income families and middle-class families. We hit that mixture. You also see it quite often with race, where we're looking at making sure that the sample that I have hits a certain specific numbers of the population of race in there. So this way we make sure we have all the demographics picked. If you actually paid any attention to education in the past 15 or so years, when No Child Left Behind came out, that was one of the big things that they did, is they started breaking down all the different categories for all the different races and socioeconomic factors and everything else, and you had to hit certain numbers in every one of those. Problem is they treated them all equally, even if they weren't all equal in the population. So, but that's how we use stratified sampling. It's a breakdown of all those different methods. Systematic sampling. Remember what I said, if I can go around and literally just tap the third person around every third person and pick those? That's in essence what systematic sampling is. We determine the population size, and we're going to calculate how many I want in my sample size, and we divide it. So if I have 30 of you in here and I want 10 people in my sample, I would pick every third person. If I wanted 6 people in my sample, I'd pick every 5th person. Okay. The key piece to this, there's 2 parts to it. 1, you want to pick a random starting point. And 2, your data has to be in random order to begin with. Okay? So you chose where you're sitting. You were not randomly spaced. So that's where the tapping of every third won't work. Okay? Your data has to be randomized before you do that systematic sampling. The problem, and what I brought up on the side there that can come into play, is sometimes when you pick, especially if the things are repetitive in nature, like they're talking about a machine. Machines have tendencies, and they normally have a pattern to them. So if you happen to hit on that pattern when you're picking it, you could pick up a lot more errors than good things when you're doing it. So like in this case, the gear, every 10th one, it happened to glitch and failed that part. So if you picked every 10, every single part that you found, it would have been a failure. If you picked every 9, you'd have had a couple of those failures, but not all of them. No idea why the screen keeps going out, and it's going to bug me. So you have to keep that in mind. If the data comes out to be in a way that like something seems wrong, go back to your process and start looking at what your process is. You might not have done anything wrong, but you might have. So you want to look at that. All these are slides. So if I go too fast or anything else, just tell me. I can always go back. Yes.
So for when it says on number 4, select that indicate individual thereafter, would it be like then 2K or 3K?
So no, it's the K is basically how many, like every group you're going to pick. So like when I was going around saying I'm going to pick every third person, 3 is K.
Okay.
So if I'm going to start with the second person, I'm going to pick the second person, the 5th person because that's 3 later, the 8th person because just adding that 3 multiple times. That makes sense? This is how a lot of times you do things on a nationwide or a large scale. We do what's known as cluster sampling. So the example for this one that I had in one of my previous books was the town wanted to put in a pool. And they wanted to analyze and figure out if the population wanted a pool at their local park. Okay? So they decided that instead of asking every single person in the town, because that would have taken too much time and money, and they didn't want to put it up to vote if it was just going to fail, they were going to send out people to do surveys. So what they decided to do was they were going to do it by block. So they randomly selected 10 blocks in the city, and they asked every single person on each of those 10 blocks. That's cluster sampling. Okay? Another way we could think about it is if I wanted to get a sample of the school, instead of asking all the people or just randomly asking people, I should randomly select the classrooms that I'm going to go into and ask those classrooms that question. And I would ask every single person in that classroom. And that would be the information that I got. Okay? Key piece of this is whatever you're picking has to be chosen at random. So if I pick classes, the classes would have to be chosen at random. If I pick blocks, the blocks would have to be chosen at random. Okay? So a cluster sampling is choosing a larger group and then asking everybody in that group, so you get a lot more. It makes it a lot easier because if I walk into a class and I ask 30 people, it's a lot easier than trying to find 30 individuals around the building. Or if I'm going to drop people off in neighborhoods, it's easier to say, go to this block, ask everybody, and then come back here so I can pick you up, than to drive to this house, ask those people, then drive 3 blocks over, ask that people, then drive another block over. It's a lot easier to do. So a lot of these methods are designed to help save money and save time. And as long as they're still done, as long as the choices that you're making to set them up is random, you're fine. There is 2 little ways we can do here. So sometimes you can stratify them. So remember we were looking back at the stratified sampling. I could choose blocks that meet the demographics. So in the example I gave you, they came back and they said that the town was going to vote no on the pool. And then somebody complained and says, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you vote no on the pool? Then they went back and looked at how they had chosen the blocks. The town had a very sharp divide in the town. 2/3 of the town was very low income, but 1/3 of the town was extremely wealthy. They all had pools. They don't need the town's pool. And those blocks that were extremely wealthy were overrepresented in that random sample that they had done. So that's where that stratified sampling would have come into play. When they were picking the blocks, they should have made sure that 2/3 of the blocks were in the lower income area and only 1/3 of the blocks were in the upper income area. And that would have given a better representation of what the town wanted. Yes? So when you're looking at trying to stratify it, you want to try to match the demographics as close as possible. Okay, so a great example, Hartford. If I said, what do you think the general economic, socioeconomic standing in Hartford is? Most of you guys would say extremely low income. And the vast majority of Hartford is. However, there is a section of Hartford in the city of Hartford, not West Hartford or anything else, that all the houses are worth over $2 million. It's crazy. That's actually where the governor's mansion is and a whole bunch of other houses over there. So when they're doing those questions, a lot of the business owners and stuff own over there, and they have a lot more influence at City Hall than a lot of the other neighborhoods. So when we want to do studies and like those, we want to make sure that it represents everybody equally. And you might even break it down to by neighborhood. So like in Norwich, you've got, what is it? It's not Terry, it's Taffville. Like you got Taffville and you got the West End and Main Street. You got the different areas in Norwich that you would want to make sure to hit those certain areas and make sure they're all represented instead of just a specific thing. The key though is even if you're trying to organize it to make sure that everybody is equally represented, is that you still want to make sure that when you choose people in those, they are chosen at random, even if it's the blocks are chosen at random. So you still have that random aspect in it, but it's organized by the demographics. This is what you can't do. Convenience sampling is really easy. There's a reason it's called convenience. Okay? Most of the ways that you're going to instantly go, oh, I'll just throw a poll up on my Facebook page. Or, oh, I'll just throw something out on TikTok and get some people to respond to it. All convenience. Okay? Those are all convenient ways to do it, which is great. However, the only people you're going to be getting are people who, one, want to answer your questions, and two, could be interested in what your topic is anyway. So if I wanted to, like the example they have here, I want to open up another library in my town. So I'm going to go stand at the library and ask people if they want another library. Guaranteed I'm going to get a whole bunch of people that say yes, because they're already going to the library. Of course they'd want another library. They probably want it closer to where they live so they don't have to drive across town to get to it. But did I ask the entire town who's going to have to pay for it? No. And a lot of other people might go, no, we already have one. We don't need to spend the money on those other ones. So you end up getting a bias based on where you're asking those questions and those type of things. What was the other example that I had? And now I can't think of it. I lost it after I said the library one. So that's where you want to make sure that you're interviewing whatever you choose randomly. So what's the key word of the day? You know, the word of the day? Random. The more random, the better. The less that you're choosing, the better. Okay? And we have great systems of computers and technology and everything else to help us choose those numbers, so we do not have to do them anymore. Okay? The way that most places do it, they stratify by state. So they will look at the population of each state and say, okay, so like California is going to get more people asked than Connecticut is going to. Actually, probably about 10 times as many people are going to be asking California than in the state of Connecticut. So they will stratify and organize by the state. Then they'll cluster by the counties. So each of the counties in the state will be broken down. So like we have 7 counties in the state of Connecticut. And then in those in those counties, they will do a random selection of houses. So notice they're stratifying by a demographic. then they're clustering, and then inside those clusters, then they're doing their random sampling. So in the end, you're still doing a random sampling of those houses. Nielsen actually chose 500 families. They were known as the Nielsen 500. That's how they decided what was being shown on TV. 500 families across the entire country. Simple random sampling. The Gallup polls and everything else, same concept. How can they organize or stratify by state if they're just randomly calling phone numbers? What does every phone number have in the beginning of it? An area code. And the area code designates what state you're in. So they will say, okay, these are the area codes in California, and I need 300 people from California. So they're going to randomly call until they get 300 people in California. And a lot of times those places will actually cluster by area code. So if like New York and LA have multiple area codes, so they'll actually cluster by area codes, and then they'll randomly select phone numbers in those area codes. Anybody want to take a, we're going to actually do this later, but anybody want to take a guess how many people would I have to ask around the entire country to figure out what the country knows or what the country wants? Remember, the population of the United States right now is around 350 million. So how many people should I ask to get a good idea of what the United States wants? Any guesses?
350,000.
Okay. Anybody else? It's a random guess. It's all, I'm not going to ask you why you came up with it. Don't worry. Just random. 350,000 is the guess. Higher or lower? You're going to be shocked at the number. 1,300. If I ask 1,300 people that are randomly selected across the United States, that is done this way, I can get a good idea of what the entire country thinks. The crazy thing is, that number doesn't change if I want to know what the state of Connecticut's doing. The number of people you have to ask is not related to the population. It's related to how accurate you want your information. The more people you ask, the more accurate it's going to be. But what's the number down the bottom of every poll that you ever see on TV? There's a little text box on the bottom of them normally. Anybody ever look at those? It says plus or minus 3%. That's the error. So to get that error, I have to ask about 1,300 people. All right. What's bias? Yeah.
It's like having or something, or feeling a certain way or something.
Okay. Give me examples. Yeah.
Like being partial towards one group or another, like for example, you couldn't, if you were deciding like who want, like if or if you're like a detective, like you would be able to interview your family member because you would have a bias towards them, therefore like, your opinion would be
Okay. What else? What are other kind of biases? Yeah.
Like judges and competitions, you usually can't have like a parent or something that has direct relationship to you be a judge because they may want to.
Yep. Okay. What else?
well, kind of like if you're trying to get like data from people, if you ask like somebody and like and you target it towards like kind of going back to your topic, you target it towards like the females, or if you're gonna be like, oh, the female
Okay. What else? Here's a crazy one. If I asked you to write down a list of 10 numbers or 100 numbers on your piece of paper, all single digit numbers, okay, randomly, one number will be higher than every single other number that you choose. You're biased to specific numbers. You like certain numbers, even if you don't think about it. You do. That's why we can never actually write down a list of random numbers, because you will focus on certain numbers that you like. Your birthday, the year you were born, a favorite single number, like some people love the number 7 or the number 9, things like that. You will focus on those numbers, even though you're not thinking about it. So there's a lot of biases that are overt. Okay, we have racial biases, we have sexual biases, we have political biases. Like those are overt. Those are things you know that might have been ingrained into you from birth or whatever else, or how you were raised. Those are things you know, and you work to eliminate those biases as much as possible. But there's other ones that you don't even think about that you have. Okay, so some biases are eliminated by the random sampling and things like that. Others are not. So here's a good example. One of the biases that they're going to look at is known as sampling bias. This is kind of what I was talking about, where you guys don't answer your phone. So this was from 1936. 1936, FDR won his first term. I was trying to remember if it was 36 or 32. So they had done a prediction, and they said that Alf Landon, who was the Republican running, was going to win in a landslide. FDR won by a landslide. Okay? They surveyed people by telephone, and they looked at card registrations. This was in 1936. Most people didn't have phones. Most people didn't have cars. The wealthy did. And the wealthy wanted Alf, which I still think is a very funny name. Mostly because I grew up in the 80s. So they favored one over the other. And when the people came out to vote, that population was overrepresented in the polls, and they got it wrong. So have we seen something similar to this recently? When was the last time the polls got it so wrong that everybody woke up like, huh? Actually, you guys might be too young. I just realized that. 10 years ago, in November 2016, pretty much everybody went into Election Day figuring Hillary Clinton was going to win. And quite well. Like, the polls had her up by almost 8 or 9 points going into November 5th. And she lost. Trump won. So the question in this one actually wasn't sampling bias. Let's see if it was the next slide I have or the next one after this one. The issue was a non-responsive bias and a lying bias. There was a lot of people that when they were polled, they stated they were going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but they were never planning on voting for Hillary. They were going to vote for Trump, but they didn't want people to know that. Okay? So when they went out to the actual voting box, because when you vote, it's private. Nobody knows how you vote. However, when you're answering questions, even though you're answering them on the phone or whatever else, and you don't think anybody's like, the person who's asking you the questions have no clue who you are, they're not writing anything down, people didn't really think of this. They assumed they were going to be able to connect it to them, and they didn't want that information out there. So they said the other one, and that messed up the polls drastically. And they had to rethink how they were doing polls after that part. So, but this, the non-responsive bias, also comes into play with you guys. You don't answer the phone. Come on. There we go. So, if a specific group of people ends up not doing the poll, they're then going to be underrepresented. So, a couple of the suggestions on how to mitigate this is just keep calling them or text them. Money works. They don't do this very much anymore, but I actually remember getting letters in the mail with actual cash in them, like an actual like $5 bill or $1 bill, like attached to a letter saying, "You can keep the money, fill this out, and send it back to us." It's like you could keep the money and not send it back to them. There was nothing they could do about it, but the vast majority of people would have filled it out and sent it back. So that does work. A lot of times nowadays they'll say if you answer the survey, they're gonna put you in a raffle. And then they'll randomly pick somebody at the end to actually get something. I would guess 9 times out of 10 they don't ever do the raffle, and nobody's ever going to call them on it because they don't really care that much. But it was just that little incentive. Just, oh, okay, I have a chance to win something, I'll do it. So incentives do help. Is that going to imply bias? Is that going to give bias, though? Is giving out incentives going to enhance a bias of a specific population? Who is more likely to answer a survey if you're going to give them a $100 gift certificate to the local grocery store? Somebody who needs the money a lot more than somebody who doesn't, right? So you might go the other direction, where you'll get a lot more bias on the lower end than you would on the upper end. Okay. That's where, when you're collecting your data, you collect some of that demographic information. You don't collect identifiable information, but you collect some of that demographic information to be able to sort and make sure you're hitting your targets in there. That's why they always ask you, they say at the end, I'm going to ask you like some demographic questions. Are you male, female, your age range, those things? That's why. Because they want to make sure they hit all their demographics. Here's the lying question. Let's see what because I can't remember what the next one was. So how you ask a question can matter. Okay. So I like the second one. Do you support the destruction of the National Park Program? I'm going to guess the vast majority of you go, no, we should not destroy the National Park Program. However, if I go, would you support cutting a program that costs $100 billion? That one might go, yeah, that's probably a good idea. Those would be basically the exact same thing. So depending on how you ask the question, depends on the responses you're going to get. How you order the questions matters. If I'm going to give you a list of 10 people and ask you to choose your favorite from those 10 people, if you're listening to the list, who are the ones that are going to stick in your mind the most? If I'm going to give you a list of 10 people, which names would stick in your mind the most? Not all 10. The first one and the last one. Okay? You are more likely to give me the answer of the first one or the last one. Or you're more likely to answer the question as soon as you hear the name you think, you're not even going to listen to the other names. Okay? So order matters. All right? So when they're giving you a list of questions to answer, a lot of times the order that they're giving them to you in is going to be different than other people. They will randomize those. So they can look for that bias in the actual data at the end. Okay? If they notice the first one's always picked the most, then they're going to eliminate that. Teachers actually did this for a while. What's the number one answer for any multiple choice test you want to choose? Everybody says choose C, right? I remember a teacher at my school who specifically made sure there was not a single answer that was C. Just to see if kids were picking all C's. Okay? So, like, how you do things can show bias or show and actually change your responses. Also, who you are. If you're an expert in the field or something like that, or just some random person, you're going to get different responses. Okay? All right. There is two types of errors. Non-sampling error, which is basically a lot of the biases and stuff like that. That one, you need to fix your design and how you chose things. How you picked the questions, how you picked who you were choosing, who you were asking, those type of things. However, you are never going to be 100% correct. It is impossible to be 100% correct unless you survey every single person. There is always an error. And actually, the vast majority of this class, after once we get through chapter 1, is going to be looking at data and figuring out what those errors are. Okay? So there will always be an error. And that's okay. That's that plus or minus 3%, or plus or minus 1% if you really need it a lot more accurate. All right. Any other questions on bias or sampling methods? We're actually almost done. We might be done early today. All right. This is 1-6. So we've done 1-3, 1-4, 1-5. This is 1-6. The language of experiment. So if we're looking at an experiment, there are certain words, certain definitions and stuff that we need to look at. The experimental unit is the person. Typically, we call them a subject. Normally, when we're doing experiments, a lot of times it's on humans or animals. So we typically call them subjects. When you have your subjects, you actually do not identify them by names. They're all going to be identified by numbers. Typically, you don't even use letters because a lot of times the letters will relate to their names, and you want that. So you typically will assign a number to every subject. This way, whenever you're looking at the data and everything else that goes with that subject, there is nothing else that can bias you on that person. The factor, which is the response variable. Okay? So the response variable is what you're trying to impact. Okay? So we could look at dosage of a medication, and the levels are going to be the different dosages that I'm going to use because I want to figure out what dosage is the best. Okay? And that would be the treatments that I would apply. And one group will get nothing. That would be my control group, which I think is on the next slide. So whenever you're doing an experiment, you need to have your treatment group and your control group. Your control group will get no treatment at all. You use this to eliminate what's known as the placebo effect. Okay? I've heard it works really well with kids. I don't have kids. You'll tell them you fix something, you put some you give them a glass, they hear some medication, and amazingly, they start to feel better. Okay? That's the placebo effect. It's the mind over matter. Sometimes your mind can do amazing things. We need to eliminate that in terms of the data. So when we're looking at to decide if something is working, we want to make sure that the difference is significant compared to what the control group did. So if I give somebody a drug and I give this group a placebo, the placebo, 20% of them got better, I would want my drug to do at least 30 or 40% better to eliminate that option. Okay. You'll hear a lot of times is double-blind studies. There are things called single blinds. But notice there's no blinds. The single blind is when the subject does not know what they got. Okay. So if you were in the control group, you wouldn't know. That's important because if you know you're in the control group, you know you're not getting the drug, so who cares? So you can never know as a subject. Double blind, which is typically the way it's done, even the researcher doesn't know which group you're in. Why would that matter? Why would it matter if your doctor didn't know? Yeah.
To, I guess, avoid the doctor's bias in
Yeah.
looking at the effects and stuff.
Because if the doctor knows you're in the placebo group, you're in the control, you're not getting the drug, and you're telling me you're getting better, the doctor's going to go, huh? Or the doctor might not treat you the same way in terms of the way they're working with you or the tests they're going to run or whatever else because they know you're not getting the drug anyway. So that's why you want that double blind. That's why it goes back to numbers instead of anything else. Because when you're doing it, basically all the drugs would be listed with the number on it. They would all look identical. Your control group, your placebo group, the pills will look identical to the treatment group so that nobody would know what's getting what. Okay? The number on it is all that identifies it. You go, okay, you're number 5. You're getting the pill bottles for 5. Nobody knows what's in. Designing them. One way is completely randomized. Okay? Think back to just a simple random thing. Everybody is just randomized on who's going to get what. A lot of times, they will do randomized blocks. Depending on what they're studying and what they're looking at, they will block people based on things that go along with that. So they will block men and women because a lot of medications work differently in men or women. So they will have a group of men, a group of women. Each one of those will have a control group and a treatment group. They could do it based on race. There's a lot of drugs that work differently based on the race of the person or the national of origin. Okay, that can make a difference. So you block based on some of the demographics, and then you randomize within those who's getting what. The special cases are matched pairs. Have you ever heard of the nature versus nurture debate? Trying to decide if, they did those with twins. When they want to study that, the best way to study it is to find a pair of identical twins that were split at birth. And then they can actually study how they grew up because genetically, everything's identical. So at that point, nature's the same, nurture would be the only difference. And they can look at that. But those are rare cases that don't always work. Okay? Another way they've done it, they can do it sometimes, is a subject will get both treatments. They'll get the control for a while, see how they do, and then they'll switch over to the actual treatment and see how they do. If all of a sudden when they switch over to the treatment, they start getting a lot better, then they have that data. So that is another way that they can do those signs of experiments. You will be happy to know we're done with chapter 1. We'll be doing a lot more calculations and stuff afterwards. We'll be looking at graphs and things like that in chapter 2. This is a lot of the definitions. A couple questions came up on the tests, or not the tests, the homework and stuff online. Your homework is due the day of the test on February 19th. I do not check it until I correct your test. So I correct your test, I put those grades in Blackboard, then I go in and look at the homework and I put those grades in Blackboard. So no, you do not have homework like due today or due Tuesday. I would highly suggest having the homework done for chapter 1 by Tuesday. So this way you stay on top of things and you can ask questions now before you get to the day before the test. In terms of tests, this is actually something that I totally forgot to talk about on Tuesday. You are allowed a note card for your test. a single 4x6 or 3x5 index card. Okay? You can write anything you want on that note card. Okay? So, what I would suggest and what I will do the week before the test, I will give you a review test. It'll be online so you can practice it, as many times as you want. When you're going through and practicing it, if you have to look something up, put it on your note card because it'll probably show up on the test. All right? So I use a note card over open notes and things like that because it gets you to study. If I just said open notes, you wouldn't study. You'd say, oh, it's all my notes. I'm good. By having you actually write down the note card, I force you to study to figure out what you need on the note card because you have limited space. The final exam, you'll have an entire sheet of paper. Basically, turns out to be the 3 index cards for your other tests that you could actually use, or you can make another single sheet of paper for your final. All right? I think that's it. Oh, the homework, you can do as many times as you want. And actually, after you submitted it for the first time and go through and do it, it'll tell you the answers. There is zero reason you should not have 100 on your homework assignments. Okay? Because all the answers will be given to you. Try them first. Figure out what you know and what you don't know. If you're totally and utterly stuck on something, take a picture and send me an email. Don't send me the email through Pearson because I can't read it. I've tried that. Somebody did that last week and I couldn't click on it. It wouldn't give me the answer. Just take a picture with your phone and send me an email with it or text me it. Say, hey, I can't figure out this question. And I'll text you back or send you back an answer. I'm really quick with my text messages. So if you send me a message, it'll pop up on my phone. As long as I'm not physically in the middle of doing something, I will respond back to you and tell you how to do it. Through my school email, tony.baker@ccstate, or on the syllabus, my phone number's on there. You can text that too. So it's all on the syllabus. Yep, my email's on there too. And it's also on Blackboard. Yeah. So, all right. Any other questions? Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you Tuesday.